Bruce Hassler, our CTO. And Bruce, come on up. You're on. While he's coming up, yeah, let's give him a hand. Bruce graduated from BYU. Go Cougars.
Woohoo!
Yep.
Yay, Cosmo.
He has a degree in computer science, and he's been a great executive at other organizations prior to this. Some of you will be familiar with ParentLink or Parlant Technologies, and he was one of their key leaders there for many years. He helped them grow, and recently they sold for over $100 million, or almost $100 million, and he was key to that success. He's also very entrepreneurial, and he's worked with EdTech in Blackboard as well, which many of you will recognize as one of the biggest players in education, in helping them grow their K-12 group. While he was there, he was a senior product director, and he oversaw all of their notification business. He also helped to build the largest emergency texting and outbound calling system in the nation, and grew the K-12 district app business to the largest in the nation. And if you stop and think about what happened last week at the high school in Florida, you know how important those notification systems are to make sure that students can find a safe place, parents know where their kids are, and to create that opportunity for them to get reconnected in those dangerous times. So he's done a lot of things, not just to create widgets, but to also improve people's lives. And he does that here too, all the time. He's worked on a number of projects, and I'm going to let him take the rest of the time. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Darren.
You gotta.
I'm mic'd up. Okay, we ready to get started? All right. Let's see if we can get our slides going. So just kind of as a side note, I've got some of the people that are actually here from Blackboard. I heard from Steve Gibson that the superintendent at that district actually used the system that we worked on to send those messages out. So it is pretty cool. So today I'm really excited to talk to you about product development. And to get things started, I want everybody to think of, what's the first thing that pops into your mind when you think about product development? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. Okay? So product development, what pops into your mind? And I want you to raise your hands. How many of you thought of a physical product, something that you can buy, touch, feel? Okay? So, I don't know, a quarter, a fifth of the people. So this guy right here, his name's James Dyson. You might have heard of him, Sir James Dyson. He's the one that invented the cool vacuum cleaner. He's holding the ball from that. So all the guts for the vacuum is inside that little ball, which is really cool. We have one at our house. I've taken it apart a few times because it's broken and I wanted to fix it. It's a really neat machine. He has over 380 patents, which is pretty incredible. And so a really good example of an entrepreneur that really knows how to have a vision and build a product that's a physical product. How many people thought of a software product? Okay. So here's an example of some code. So this is real source code from a product that probably all of you use every single day. Okay, so who wants to take a guess at where this came from? What source code is this? Any takers? Okay, close. Yeah, people use Facebook all the time. So you see Android in there. So this is actually a snippet of source code from Google Chrome. Okay, so everybody uses the Chrome browser, at least a lot of people do. So that's kind of fun. How many people thought of the code from the Matrix? Probably nobody. This used to be my screensaver at one of my jobs, but it's kind of fun. So code really isn't like that, guys. So this is just in the movies, but kind of fun to illustrate a point. One of the things that warms my heart the most is to know that we have future developers like this. So these are some kids from RevRoad employees. They came here on career day. And I took them through a coding class. And one of the things that they learn how to do is get that little squirrel over there to go find the nut. And so you can go to code.org, you can go through these things, and they have a visual code thing where you can move blocks of things. We actually had them learn JavaScript to do that. And so that's real JavaScript on the whiteboard. They did that. I wrote my first line of code when I was like 22 years old. So I was kind of one of the late adopters. So I took a class in college, learned how to code there, and I think that these kids probably did a better job on their first day than I did. And so that's what's really cool. So this is what makes me happy, is that the upcoming generation has the opportunity to do this. So today I want to talk about a couple things. How do you build your software? Well, how do you build your product? And we talked about software and product, physical products. I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about software. The reason why is since helping to found RevRoad, I've talked to hundreds of companies. Probably, I would say 75% of those companies need some kind of help building a software product. And so I want to spend most of my time talking about this. Most of the principles that we'll go through today apply, to a physical product as well as software products, though. So I want to talk specifically about how to build it and when to build it. So let's talk about how. So this is the how. This is a really high level how products are built. So there's different inputs. And we'll talk about where those inputs come from. There's a design phase that you go and you design what you want to build. You actually go through and you build it, and then you release it. So, and we're going to tweak this process just a little bit. But what I want to start off first is when to build it. And so Pete, who's over here, he's over our strategy and scaling, and he was able to articulate really well the different stages of a startup. So I stole this from him. And I want to talk about how that relates to when you should actually deploy resources and start building. And so as we go through the startup stages, the first stage is kind of an idea stage. It's like, oh, I've got an idea. I think it would be really cool to do this. Or I see this problem, and I think it would be really cool to do this. And all of us have had those ideas. And so that's kind of the first stage. The next thing is this something that you really want to do, right? It's really easy to have a whole bunch of ideas, but it's harder to say, hey, I want to commit the rest of my life for the next 5 years to doing this thing. I can go defend my idea with my friends and with my family and with investors. And so that's kind of the next stage is actually, jumping in both feet and deciding that you want to do it. After that, it's really important to distill, so if you think of that idea being at the high level of this is the thing that I want to do, stage number 3, the problem solution stage, is really drilling down on what are the problems that you're trying to solve. And the only really way to do that is to talk to people, talk to lots of people. And you can do that formally, you can do that informally. The most important thing is to get out there and talk to people, drill down on what the problems are. We teach people how to have what's called a problem interview, where you uncover what their problems are and you learn a whole lot of things. And then what you can do is you can come back and you can present solutions. And they may or may not like your solution. You can repeat that and you can keep going through that. And so that's what that stage is. The next thing is once you've actually built something, will the market buy it? So that's what the next stage is. And hopefully, you've done some research beforehand to see is that viable, just from a business plan standpoint. But when the rubber actually meets the road and you have something out there, people are either going to buy it or they're not going to buy it, or they're going to adopt it or not adopt it. So that's the market fit. And then the next two things is optimize it and scale it. And we call that nail it and scale it. And so where do you think most people want to start actually building stuff? Who has an idea? This is the overwhelming majority of the people that I took to. They want to start building it in what stage? I heard idea. So absolutely right. Most people want to start building stuff in the idea stage. You hear these Cinderella stories of someone that went to Harvard and they had this great idea and they were an engineer and they started coding that night and then it blew up and became Facebook, right? Everybody's heard that story. That doesn't happen very often. There's like only one Facebook, right? Most people that start doing this fail. And the reason they fail is they start spending time and resources and money and it doesn't work out. Right? And then they're out of money, right? And it goes out of business. The best thing to do that we teach people is start somewhere around here. After you started to drill down on those problems and solutions, and you know exactly what you want to build, and you know whether it's going to actually do something, that's the right time to deploy the resources and start building it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so this is the when. So let's take the how and let's tweak it a little bit. So we had that linear thing that was drawn out before. Which was kind of like, well, there's this beginning and then there's this end. The world isn't that clean, right? So this lets us, focus on having inputs, and those inputs can come from a lot of different places. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's an iterative process. And the quicker you can go around that circle, the quicker you can drill down on actually solving problems and having something that's successful. And so as we talk about inputs, you have inputs that are internal. Right? And that starts all the way up with that initial idea phase. And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of companies get stuck in just having everything being inward facing. All the thought leadership, all the thought processes, they come from the people inside the company. And that's really limiting, right? It also gives you just one perspective. And a lot of the times that perspective is wrong. Another place to get inputs is from the market. What are other people doing there that are trying to solve that same problem? What's the competition doing? What are different things in the market? And then there's customers. This is actually a pretty long list, but I just want to bring up these 3. One of the things that we really want people to do is to get as far down in that chain as possible. It's really important to get feedback from customers, people that will use that. That's the best way to find out what those problems are and figure out whether they're going to use your solutions. Just want to give you a quick example. So who in here has heard of the app called Bourbon? Okay, Tyler has, because I think I talked to him about it. Eric has. Not a whole lot of people. So let's talk about Bourbon. So this was an app that was launched, I don't know, 2009-ish. It was launched by a couple guys. You might recognize them, Kevin and Mike. They were Stanford grads. They had this idea of having this check-in app. And these things were all the rage back then. It's pretty similar to Foursquare, if you've heard of that. And so, I could go to like my favorite coffee shop. I could go check in. Everybody could see, hey, Bruce is over here. I could go make plans with my friends. I could earn points from hanging out with my friends. I could post pictures and I could chat. So they built this really cool app. They put it in the App Store. They ended up getting about $500,000 of funding, which is just like nuts because they didn't really have anything. And guess why nobody's heard of Bourbon? It was a complete failure. They got a total of 100 people to adopt their app, right? So a little bit more than what's in this room right now. That's how many users they had. It's really hard to make users with 100, or to make money with 100 people. And so one of the things that they did, and so this is an example of, hey, they had this idea. They didn't really use those inputs very well. This all came from their brains. They just had this idea. They started executing it. They built it. But they made a key change after it failed. They went back and they looked at the 100 people that were using it. And they said, what was it that made, what was it that they were doing? What did they like about the app? And the one thing that they kind of zeroed in on was everybody loved the picture capability. They loved being able to post pictures of, of the places that they went and interacting geared around those pictures. And so they made a really critical pivot, and it changed their course of history. How many of you have heard of Instagram? Everybody, okay? And probably most people in this room have used it. That's what became Instagram, by the way. So they pivoted. They released Instagram about 2 or 3 months after they made this realization. Guess how many downloads they had the first 24 hours? I'll give you a hint. It was more than 100, right? They had 25,000 downloads in a 24-hour period from this, just from making that one change. Instagram was pretty simple. I looked all over Google, and I couldn't find a screenshot of the very first version of Instagram. I found a screenshot of version 2 of it, which had a lot more stuff, but it was still pretty simple. First version of Instagram was very simple. I could take a picture. I could use a filter, right? That's what they're known for. I could connect with other people, and I could share that. That's all it did. It's the only thing it did. But guess what? It solved a huge problem. Because guess what was big back then? People were just getting these cell phones that were starting to get good at taking pictures, and they had no way to share it. And so that's what they stumbled upon. That's what they learned through their research. And so this is a fun example. That's the very first picture that was posted on Instagram. That's kind of fun. So that's an example of how inputs can be, super powerful, right? Company that didn't do anything, company that got sold 2 years later to Facebook for $1 billion. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is design. One of the other things that I see way too often is that people go from idea to coding, and you could kind of do that like 15 years ago. Remember when the internet was just like gross and ugly, but it didn't matter because it was so cool to be on there? Some of you may, some of you may not. User experience makes all the difference now. You cannot have a successful company without having a good designer and having a good user experience. For a long time, everybody, myself included, and probably a lot of you have this conception right now, is when you think of design, you think of just pretty graphics, right? You think of what does a designer do? They make stuff look pretty. A really valuable designer thinks about more than just making stuff look pretty. They think about what does the user experience do? How do they feel when they use the product? Because when people have an emotional reaction to their product, guess what? They're going to come back. They're going to come back and use it again. They're going to tell your friends about it. If they don't have that emotional reaction, it's really hard to get traction there. And so design makes all the difference. The other thing that people think is, oh, if I do design, if I don't start coding today, then that's going to make this process longer. I would say I have like hundreds of examples how having a good design process built in saves a ton of time. It's way easier to iterate on a design than to go code something up and get feedback and then realize that it was wrong. And so saves tons of time. Keep it simple. So this is a design principle. This is probably one of the most important design principles. I want to share just something really quickly. So this is a picture of the first smartphone that I owned. So way back, probably summer of 2006, I bought this thing. This was the best thing on the market. This was the Samsung Blackjack. It could do everything. It looks like it could do everything, right? There's a billion buttons on there. It ran some flavor of Microsoft's mobile operating system. I think there was a manual that came with it that was about this thick. It had 1,000 features. I was so excited. I love technology, so I went and I opened it up and tried all this stuff out. Guess what I ended up using? I used 2 features. Well, really 1.5. I used it to make phone calls, which this thing was horrible at making phone calls. That's the keypad, right? And it's not shaped very well for making, anyway, it was a horrible phone. And I used it a little bit for email. Email was kind of clunky. It didn't work really great. So you have this. This was the best thing on the market at the time, best smartphone in the market. In January of 2007, I think, Steve Jobs got on stage and announced this thing, right? So this is the very first iPhone. And when Steve Jobs talked about the iPhone, he said it's 3 things. First, it's a revolutionary mobile phone. 2, it's an awesome iPod, so it plays music. And 3, it's a cool internet device, right? And so, you know, you take this 1,000-feature phone and compare it to this other phone, and it did more than 3 things, but in all fairness, but, you know, it did way fewer things than that Blackjack did. Guess what I used it for? I adopted just about everything on there. I used all of it. And so you can see from having this simple design that was very focused, the value that they produced was way better than what Samsung did. Okay? So that's one of the valuable things about keeping it simple. These are just a few design tools. We won't go into too much detail on this, but the important thing is even if you're not a designer, you can do some of this stuff yourself, right? You know, we can all, you know, scratch some stuff out on paper and go show it to somebody and say, hey, would you use this? Or what's wrong with this? What am I missing? Kind of a fun one to use, there's a program called Balsamic, which makes these wireframe prototypes, and they're not supposed to look pretty, and it's supposed to look hand-drawn on purpose, because the purpose of it is to make people focus on the features and not how pretty it is. Everybody's heard of the Adobe Suite, Illustrator, and Photoshop, and all of those things, so that's kind of moving up to the next level. A couple of tools that we use here is we use a program called Sketch and a prototyping program called Envision. And so that's what we use as part of our design process to be able to design things and have people look at it. This is an example of one of the things that we designed for a company called ProLink that's here. And so you can see that we did all of this without writing a single line of code. And this is where it makes it easy. When I can go to a developer and say, hey, I want you to build this, that's way easier than to describe that, you know, what that's going to look like. And so this is one example of where that saves time. Design's a big deal, guys. Who all heard about this on the news? So I should say who didn't hear about it. You had to be under a rock. So I think it's cool that somebody actually got a screenshot of this. I've never got one of these emergency alerts. I think it would be cool to get one, except for not for a nuclear attack. So this is an example where user design is left out of the process completely. So this is the interface that the person operating, this is where they screwed up, right? So I talked about the websites, what things look like in, you know, the 90s and 2000s. It's pretty similar to this. So this is an example where, hey, I have a problem. I'm just going to code it up. I can't really, if there wasn't that red and green box, I wouldn't even be able to tell which was the right one and which was the wrong one here for the person that screwed up. So this is an example of where just not doing design, period, it was kind of a big thing, right? So luckily, they didn't actually launch the missile. You know, so that would be worse if this was the missile interface. Maybe it is. That's what's scary. So design's a big deal. So let's move on to the build part. And so this is where everybody actually wants to skip to and start doing the work. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. And the main thing to remember with everything that I'm talking about today, everybody has their own opinion about this stuff, right? You go ask 10 people what the best thing is to do, and you'll get 10 different answers. So I'll share with you some general rules of thumb, but just kind of take it for what it's worth. So development process. So let's start with that. Everyone here probably has heard of agile development. That's kind of the new thing that's in vogue. Everybody's doing it. And I want to talk a little bit about why it's so powerful. So Agile's pretty simple. So first of all, it's an iterative approach to development. So I showed you that circle. So it lends itself really well to iterating through that circle quickly. The main gist is this. You have a big pile of work that needs to be done. Okay? So let's make a spreadsheet or put it in whatever tool you're using. Let's get that big pile of work documented, and then let's prioritize it. Okay? And what that consists of is you have a plan. And part of that plan is you want to say, what can I do for the next sprint? And a sprint is a specific amount of time. And most people that do Agile will do anything from like 1 to 4-week sprints. So let's say that we're doing 2-week sprints. So I'll go take everything that's been prioritized. I'll say, OK, team, what can you do and deliver in 2 weeks? I'm like, OK, well, I can go do this stuff. So that's my plan. Then the sprint, that's where we actually get to work. So people start coding stuff up. Sorry, this is my universal sign for coding. So they code stuff up, and then they deliver it. The cool thing about the principles of Agile, and this picture depicts that, is you're supposed to deliver value along the way. So as part of the cycle, you deliver value. And as you deliver value, that's what helps you get feedback. And so most of you might have heard of the development methodology called waterfall, right? And if you look at the top picture, this is an example of that. So if I'm going to build a car, and I'm going to do that using the waterfall method, I'm going to go have this big upfront design and say, OK, what is the car going to look like? And it's going to have all these specifications. And that's what I'm going to do. As I build it, I'm going to build it a piece at a time. There won't be any value delivered until the last step is done. Right? As you look at the picture, I can't do anything with just a wheel. And so the customer really doesn't get anything out of it till the very end. And if you want to change something, good luck. It's really hard. Right? If we contrast that with Agile, one of the things that we can do is we can deliver value. So let's say that the customer's problem is they want to get from point A to point B, right? If I'm doing Agile development, I can go build them a skateboard. Is a skateboard going to make them super happy if they want a car? Probably not. But it can help get them from point A to point B. And so I can get a little bit of feedback on that. And then I can go make it better. And let's say by the time we get to stage 3, the customer's decided, well, you know what? On second thought, maybe I want a convertible instead of this hardtop. Because I've been riding around on this skateboard and on this bicycle and on this scooter, and I really like the wind in my hair. So that'd really make me happy. I can change that with Agile. I can't really change that with waterfall. And so that's the whole purpose of Agile. So, and I've oversimplified a lot of this, but I hope that makes sense to you guys. So head nods. OK, cool. So that's Agile. The next thing that I get asked a whole lot about is the people that actually build the stuff, the team. What do I do? And so I've got a few different examples of the choices that people have. And I want to talk about those. And this is where it gets to start to get a little bit controversial. So first of all, do I hire an in-house development team? My personal recommendation is if technology is core to your business, so if you're going to build like some SaaS product, for instance, and that's your business, that's what you're going to sell, I think it makes a lot of sense to actually have some stake and have some core competency in that area. And so I would recommend hiring an in-house development team, right? And so that's one of the things that I would look at. If it's like, technology isn't super central and I want to build this one app that's going to be thrown away because I'm going to use it for this event, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go hire a whole bunch of developers for, okay? So in-house, some of the things that you get is you get people that work on your team. So they can get behind your mission and your vision. They know what market you're in. They can eat, sleep, and breathe your product. And that's actually really powerful. In-house development teams have a quality of what I like to call enlightenment. And what that means is that you can give them a problem, and they can come up with the solution for you, right? Whereas if I outsource that, I have to come up with a solution and document that and pass it off, right? And so that helps give you instant capacity just by doing that. Some of the downsides of having in-house development teams, first of all, it's hard to hire, it's hard to build a team, right? There's a shortage of developers in the US here. So it's hard to find good talent and build a team. 2, it's expensive. Having a whole bunch of, really smart people that have CS degrees on your payroll is expensive. So it's a big upfront cost. It's a big investment. And so those are the trade-offs that you look at. The other option is to outsource that, right? And there's a few different flavors of outsourcing. So I'll go ahead and just put them all on here right now. So you could go find a freelancer right, or a contract worker. The couple that we had here, Chris and Heidi Hanks, that built the Little Bee Speech app, this was one of the things that they really like to do. They like to hire contract workers. And some of the pros of doing that is, one, it's cheaper than doing it in-house. You don't have to make that commitment of, hey, I'm going to have this person on my payroll. Two, if you don't like them, you can go, it's relatively easy to switch them out. That's also good and bad, too. And three, it's, like I said, it's a little bit cheaper than doing that in-house. The downsides of doing that is that's probably the most unstable thing that you can do, right? If you're building your business around, this software, this technology piece, the freelancer might not, he might go get a good job at Google a year later. And so that's a pretty unstable environment to be in. And one of the problems with all of the outsourced teams is that it's typically hard to transfer that knowledge to those teams, right? And some of it's easier than others. So let's kind of move on to the next stage. So hiring a dev shop in the US. And I've split those up into two things. There's dev shops in the US and kind of dev shops everywhere else. And I put them in two different categories for a reason. As you look at US dev shops, one, it's going to be more expensive. A lot of times over the long term, having a US dev shop would be more expensive than hiring people internally, right, long term. Because there's overhead that they have to, they need to make money too, right? The good thing about US dev shops is it's going to be pretty consistent, right? They typically will speak the same language that you do, which is good. They'll work similar hours to what you do. And so you can kind of make that work. And then lastly, overseas dev shops. People hire overseas, and everybody has an opinion on this, right? People hire overseas dev shops for two main reasons. The first thing that pops into everybody's head is price, right? Hey, I can go hire a whole bunch of developers in this country for way cheap dollars. The trends on that is those cheap dollars keep going up and up, right? I would say probably the better reason to hire, if I were going to hire overseas, is this. There is so much talent outside the US that's not being utilized right now. You think about India, for instance. India has way more extra programmers than the US does. And so from a capacity standpoint, being able to hire standpoint, I think that's probably the real draw for overseas development. And so those are kind of the two positives that everybody thinks of. The negatives, we could go, there's lots of negatives, and a lot of you guys understand the negatives, right? It's pretty difficult to communicate with a lot of the overseas places, right? It's hard to make that work in your organization. I've seen overseas dev shops work well, and when they work well, it takes lots of work. There needs to be people dedicated to having interactions. They need to be dedicated to, basically making them part of the company, right? Where it doesn't work, where it is like, oh, I will just go hire somebody overseas to save money, and it will be the same as if I have an in-house dev shop. And so those two things don't make sense. So I'll kind of leave it at that. The one thing that I do want to point out is, in terms of innovation, the main thing that I've seen from a trend standpoint, I would say probably the average programmer in like India, for instance, is probably on average maybe a little bit better than the average US programmer. The innovation that you're going to get from the average programmer and overseas is going to be way lower than you get from the average innovation from someone in the States. And so there's some trade-off there. And so I would say if you're a highly innovative company, having an in-house dev team is also super beneficial. So anyway, is that helpful? Okay. Some head nods, some grimaces. That's what I expected. So the other thing that they forgot to point out, also the further you get down on this list, the more specificity that you need to have, right? So the thing that I need to give to, and this comes with the enlightened teams conversation, the things that I need to give to a US developer that's on my team that knows my business is different than what I would give to someone else, okay? So technology, this is kind of a fun one. I'm just going to go ahead and bring all of this on here. So programming languages, so all of that code that you saw from Chrome, that was written in a language called C. Here's some popular programming languages. People ask me all the time, Bruce, what's the best programming language? That question is similar to like, what's the best flavor of ice cream? there's not really a best programming languages. There's lots of things that are good, but it really there's a lot of factors in that. Databases, here's some big popular databases. That's the thing that actually stores data. And then technology platforms. One of the cool things about starting a company today is that technology platforms exist. So if you started a company, 20 years ago and you wanted to build something, it was a lot harder. You couldn't just go pay Amazon money and have servers that magically scaled. And so this has made it possible to build things that are, that are fast, that are scalable. Where before you'd have a lot of upfront capital cost. You'd have to go buy servers, which just sounds bonkers in today's world, but it's really nice to do that. The other thing that I would recommend as far as picking some of these technology platforms, I would go to AWS or go to Google or go to Azure and see what options are available. What programming languages do they support? What platforms do they support? And usually if you pick something that's on their stack, you can't go wrong because they usually have technology that scales and that builds really well. So that's one of the things that we've done as well. And so we're going to have the dev team come up here. And if you guys have any questions about this or about what we do, we can do that. But right now, time for Q&A. And so I thought it'd be fun to just open this up for the next 5 minutes or so. See if you have any questions about building products or about technology, and just kind of go from there. So, questions?
Bruce, I know that one of the challenges a lot of development teams have is trying to estimate time it would take, and most devs don't like making an estimation because they know that it's going to be wrong and that they're going to be held to that responsibility. What's the best way to try going about doing that?
Okay. I feel remiss for not having included that in my slides. So the question is, hey, Bruce, nobody likes to do estimations. Developers don't like to do estimations. Product managers don't like to or don't know how to. What's the best solution there? The fact of the matter is, doing estimations for development is near impossible, right? You can get okay at it, but one of the things that I've found that works best is to get close. Don't spend a lot of time. You can waste a lot of development time just getting estimations. I think you need to get, what we do is t-shirt sizes. Is it at an extra small, meaning I can do that quickly? Or is it super hard, meaning it's a large? And if you can kind of just group things in those buckets, and those are just more gut checks. So that's not like, hey, Bruce, it's going to go take 10 days to do this. It's a gut check of how hard is it to do. And I attach t-shirt sizes to everything that we do. And then we use that as part of the criteria for ranking, frankly. And so I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but as you organize that work, customer importance is part of that ranking. Bang for your buck is definitely part of that ranking. If I have something that's super hard, it's like a large, and only gives me minimal value from a customer standpoint, that's going to be ranked way low. If there's something that a customer loves that's easy to do, I'll do that all day long. And so you have to take that into account. So I'd say don't spend a lot of, it's important to do, but don't spend a ton of time doing it. Good question, though. Other questions? Okay, Seth.
Is there some sort of hierarchy or paradigm? Is there some sort of hierarchy or paradigm that you use in order to when you're designing different features, maybe for multiple stakeholders in some sort of project? How do you approach, from a design perspective, being pulled on multiple directions?
That's a great question. So a good example of this is, I'm building something where I'm doing a B2B sell, right? So I have a different buyer than a customer, right? The buyer has different needs than what the user has, right? Different criteria. You have to balance both, right? If you build something that makes customers super happy and doesn't make the buyer happy, it'll be hard to make money. And if you build something that is just geared around, hey, this will make it easy to sell, I can go check off all the boxes on the RFP, you have something that doesn't get adopted in the long term. So you have to cater to both. And so I don't know if there's any good rules of thumb, but you just have to take that in as you weight those of, hey, is this going to make the user happy, or is this going to help me make money? And both are important. I don't know if that was what you're looking for, but.
Yes,
Card.
similar question.
Oh, wow, look at that. I appreciated your response on the estimating, because that's been my experience as well. It's almost impossible. And prioritization, I almost feel like you can say the same thing a little bit. I'm just curious your approach to it, because you talked very simply again about, I have this body of work, I prioritize it. Whoa, 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 whoa. To me, I mean, right? There's something that's important or a priority to that team, but not to that team. And there's a priority to the company, yes, but there's this factor that's involved, and we got to do long-term things and short-term things. How do you prevent prioritization from becoming, putting out the fires?
Nightmare. So Carter is actually a product manager, and so he understands this world really well, right? So he's helping to figure what this out is for Allegra. He probably has his product management spreadsheet up right now, so that's why he's asking the question. I think the same thing with estimating is that it's important to consider, but don't get too much in the weeds. A good product manager, we haven't really talked about product managers, need to be able to represent the customer and make, you should be able to do gut check calls of, hey, how much will this benefit the customer? How much will this benefit the buyer? And just kind of, one of the things that I do, if I were to do this with a spreadsheet, I would have the features, I would have t-shirt sizes, I would have, how much benefit does this provide for these different stakeholders, and end up coming up with some kind of score. And then that helps me rank things pretty easily, but you can spend too much time. The great thing about Agile is if you screw up, you screw up for one, iteration. So you'll eventually get back on track. So that's the beautiful thing about it. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but.
It is helpful. Sorry.
Soft now.
Sure.
But just anything else you can add as far as like long-term versus short-term goals and projects, prioritizing those. I mean, if I just, spend my time doing the things that are upcoming, and I don't do those important but not urgent cubby quadrant things, right? So how do I prioritize that versus a short-term thing?
Okay. So I understand where you're getting from. So, with the pile of work, there's always the, there's the put out the fire. There's what is either broken right now, right? So those are some fires. There's what does this customer want so that I can get this contract, and then there's long term. I think the easiest way to do that is divide your sprints and say, I want to allocate this much to, like bugs, for instance. One of the things that I've done in the past is say, hey, I'm going to allocate 10% of my time to bugs, and then my bugs have this priority, and it means if this thing's number 6 and I don't have enough time, it just falls off the list. I would do the same thing for long-term and short-term things too. I want to spend X% of my sprints doing long-term projects. And that way you don't have to think about it. The whole key for product management is to make it so you don't have to think. So implement things where because otherwise it's like one of the hardest jobs ever. So, okay. All right, so that's about time for questions. If any of you guys have questions, come find me afterwards. We're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back, and we get to hear from Kelly. Did you want to say anything else, Darren?
Yeah, I was just going to thank. Yeah. Wait, come here. Let's hear it for Bruce.